Well, g'day, James. How you doing today? Thanks so much for joining me. I'm so excited to chat to you.
Always great to see you, Rowan. Thanks so much for having me on.
Well, for the first question, I like to change it up a little bit, and I asked a question to Brandon T. Adams, and I might actually ask you the same question. And basically, I know you've got a young daughter now. I know she's not quite yet at school age, but if you put yourself into the situation where she's maybe 6 or 7 years old, and you get asked to go along to a take your parent to work day, how would you describe in that situation what you do?
That is such a good question. And it's a hard one for me to answer. I guess overall, I just tell people learn how to win the day every day. So it's like, well, what does winning the day actually look like? Well, first of all, you need to know what the win looks like for you on that day. You can't win the day if you don't know what winning looks like. And the way I think about that is really three cornerstone pillars, helping people take ownership of their financial, physical, and mental health. So I do that through a whole bunch of different ways, but that would be my brief elevator pitch to get them excited, hopefully, in what I'm about to talk about.
Absolutely. We'll certainly get into a lot more of that in terms of how you came to do that, and a little bit more in terms of what you do at the moment currently. Uh, but one thing that I'm interested in starting is one thing that we've spoken a little bit about before is that idea of the call to adventure. And it's one thing that we try and do on the podcast is get into that idea of the call to adventure. And I suppose one thing that I'm interested in is what did that look like to you initially?
Yeah, again, really good question, Rowan. So who grew up in Brisbane, Australia. I live in LA now. I've been in America now for almost 10 years. So it was actually about 2012 when I first moved over to America. I was in Boston. I just felt this urge that when I was in Australia growing up, there was just this, I always had this massive sense of resistance to being put into a box. And what I mean by that is being categorized, classified in some way. It didn't matter what it was. The thought of being put into a box just scared the hell out of me. And I really didn't delve too much into the psychology of what that was. But the big call to adventure for me, I guess it's just something that I had within from a moment at around the age of 23 when I'd had a whole bunch of issues with anxiety, which had really made my existence pretty horrible, to be honest. For the years leading up to that, it was quite brutal in the way that it manifested, and you just surrounded yourself with people who aren't great, drinking too much, eating crappy food, not paying any attention to what I actually wanted. And the way I like to think about that is I was a bit like a weak flame, and you're a weak flame if even the slightest gust can just blow you, can either extinguish you or blow you off course. And what finally happened for me is when I made the decision to really plant a flag to life and say, here I am, come and get me. And since that moment, that was when I really consumed everything that I could find on peak performance, psychology, mindset, all of that type of stuff, and started to really just go after it and really think about what is it that I wanted to achieve in life. Now, I had no idea what my mission was at that time, and it took me, another 8 or 9 years to even find it beyond that. But I was always focused on becoming a person of increasing value, surrounding myself with the right people, and always giving without the expectation of anything in return. Now, a good example of that is a friend of mine who I texted today, who I basically sent him an audio message and said, look, I'd love it if you could connect me with Les Brown. From memory, you were connected with him. And he just wrote back straight away and said, yes, I'll be right back. 5 minutes later, he texted me an intro to Les Brown with his mobile number. To be in a situation to be able to do something like that with a person who's obviously changed the lives of billions of people, being Les Brown, it's the accumulation of all of those little steps that's finally got me to the point. So that call for adventure, to tie it right back in, was just this sense deep within that there was just much more to my story than where I was at. It was this weird feeling, this weird sensation that I had to get out of there and test myself. And what that ultimately looked like was moving to the complete other side of the world from Brisbane to Boston, and that was really it.
Yeah, well, I think, James, there's honestly so much to unpack with your story. You've lived such an interesting life so far. But one of the things that really stands out to me about the way that you describe that, and even the terminology that you use in terms of win the day, it almost feels, on the surface of it, it can seem quite a competitive notion in terms of, you winning the day, into, you're competing against potentially other people to do that. But I think as we get into, as we find out more, as we'll unpack it, a lot of your stuff is actually more about almost forming a partnership, collaborating with others, and winning, I suppose, against a a more depersonalized enemy in that sense, in terms of it's not any one particular person that you're winning against. It's potentially a lesser version of yourself that if you were not to apply yourself in the same way, you wouldn't be able to achieve the things that you're potentially capable of.
Yeah, winning the day. A lot of when I talk about winning the day, which I do constantly, it's really my tagline for everything that I do. That really stemmed from the Napoleon Hill quote that I read when I was preparing for Think and Grow Rich: The Legacy as author of the book and executive producer of the film. When I read Napoleon Hill say that the poverty conscious will automatically overtake any mind that is not preoccupied with being success conscious, that's when I was like, oh my God, people, if we don't have that intent, if we're not clear on what it is that winning looks like today, then we're naturally going to fall victim to distraction, procrastination, and anything else that's going to knock us off course for that day. And how we do anything is how we do everything. So that one day becomes a week, becomes a month, becomes a year, becomes our life. That's why winning the day is so important. Now, an example of winning the day for me today is we're lucky enough, my wife and I, to have a nanny who looks after our daughter 5 days a week. It's school holidays, so she's away this week. So my version of winning the day today was to take my daughter to the beach. And what an amazing opportunity to be able to do that on a Wednesday. What a great life to be able to do that. But previous iterations of me might have gone like, oh, wow, how frustrating, how stressful. You've got all this work and different things to do. And the way I thought about it today was just it was such a positive reframe of just what an incredible opportunity. There are people out there, most of the world would love the idea of being at the most perfect day that you could possibly imagine, Manhattan Beach in California, with my daughter who's almost 2 years old, who I love more than anything, just watching her pointing at surfers and chasing birds and running on the sand and in the water. It's a beautiful moment. That was a win for me. Now, there are other times where a win might be to go and to get 80 people registered for an event, or to establish a high level partnership with someone, or to go and be a really great guest on a podcast show, or to bring a great energy to speak on stage in front of 2,000 people. An example of me winning the day yesterday was to turn up to this physical, basically my personal training session, to say, I just need to make sure that I can rock up on time. So there's many different ways of winning the day. I think if for people who are just starting out, just try and think about 3 things that you can do to win that day and make them a bit of a combination of things rather than all being focused on the business side. And I think if you can do that, you can then move forward in those 3 areas with an alignment of success rather than being successful in one field and letting those other things fall by the wayside.
Yeah, it's a fascinating perspective. And I think it's one of those things that, you mentioned Napoleon Hill there. When you read Think and Grow Rich, for example, it almost hits you across the face and you sort of go, hold on, why is this, not really sort of taken off in terms of more of an attitude and more people subscribe to these theories? And I'm really excited to get into some of that stuff with you in a little bit. But if we just go back to this call to adventure idea quickly, it sounds like a little bit of what you were speaking about there in terms of going through some anxiety and I know you went through a period of time at around the age of 23 that was quite tough for you. And that seems to me to relate to that, those notions of the dark night of the soul and the transformation that comes from that. And so I just wonder if you could speak to that notion a little bit in terms of how do you feel those tougher times gave you insight into what is now your attitude going forward?
Yeah, it gave me an enormous sense of empathy for people and compassion for people who are going through those situations. Now, the people who I've interviewed, I've interviewed people like a triple amputee who was a 19-year-old who was at war in Afghanistan in the U.S. Marine Corps, and then he was blown up basically by an IED that his metal detector didn't pick up. And when he woke up in a hospital in Germany, he reached down to feel his legs and felt the hospital bed because his legs weren't there. And the doctor walked in and said, your right arm is so badly crushed, we have to amputate it. Like, these are situations. There are people like that now that I've interviewed. There's people I've interviewed who are blind at the age of 18 and go on to be the author of 30 best-selling books and the founder of an actual television network. People who have been hit by a truck and have now got a TED Talk with more than 4 million views. Like, I've interviewed enough of these people to know that we have this immense human spirit that can achieve really anything that we want, but you have to know exactly who you are and you have to know exactly where you want to go. Those moments that you mentioned for me when I was 23 and in the years preceding that, I had no idea who I was or where I wanted to go. It was only once I was clear that I had that self-belief of knowing that what's possible was possible for me. And I was able to focus that on a specific objective, a destination of what I wanted in my life. that's when everything changed for me. Now, the people out there who I talk to, you know that I work with thousands of people all over the world to help them level up their business, their podcast, their life, their relationships, all of those different things. The people who feel like they're treading water in life, or they're just not at the level they want to be. And often these are people who have enormous financial success. It's because they're not clear on who they are and they're not clear on where they want to go. I think those are the two things that people need to start on if you want to live a meaningful life.
Certainly, and there's such central notions to this Individuate podcast, in terms of, for me anyway, I think the process of going through starting a podcast is something that allowed me to really connect with some of those themes. But I wonder if there was anything for you that really helped you to discern some of that.
There's so many books I've read now, interviews and things that I've done with people and just continue to do. Like, I'm so focused on learning, 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 and at the same time focusing on what I can do to give back, give back, give back, contribute. A guy I just had on my podcast, which obviously is called Win the Day, is a guy who was the all-time leading point scorer in the NFL when he retired. An amazing story of the work he's doing now with Native American communities who have got some of the most horrific rates of things like substance abuse and things like that. We all have this incredible opportunity to learn from each other. And as we gain this awareness of new perspectives, it really starts to change the DNA of exactly the types of products and things that we create and the solutions that we create. You've got a great podcast and you're doing some amazing work in the world. That stems from all of the awesome perspectives and things that you have been able to have in your life experience because you've been actively seeking those things out. We did that session earlier this year that went to live to people in death row. Like, I'd never in a million years, I imagined that I would speak to people who were on death row in a North Carolina prison. And quite frankly, I wasn't sure if I ever wanted to do that. But what I realized is that I carried a large number of limiting beliefs into that session, which now is completely eradicated. And it means the perspective that I have and the contributions that I can bring through the conversations that I have, the podcasts that I create, the different products and solutions I bring to the world to help the people that I care about most are now so much stronger because of those different perspectives that I've had. So I think as long as we've got that lens of increasingly becoming a person of value while always seeking out as many perspectives as we can find rather than buying into our confirmation bias, then that's how we can start to do some really cool transformation for the world.
Certainly. And I think it's so interesting as well to look at where some of this stuff comes from too, in terms of, you talk about that idea of building on the perspective of others that have come before them. One thing that really stood out to me, I've actually got it written here because it's such an eloquent way of saying it that I'd never be able to. But in terms of when Andrew Carnegie first approached Napoleon Hill, essentially he asked him, will you dedicate your life to unearth and document the secrets of the most successful people to have ever lived and share this formula with the world to give everyone the opportunity to fulfill their dreams and achieve anything they so desire? And you sort of hear this and, you think this was 100 years ago. This was over 100 years ago now that this sort of stuff came out. And now we've had 100 years of people building upon those themes. And so to me, it's such a positive way of looking at the future in terms of if we can just get these messages out. I think there's so much that we can transcend in terms of some of the negativity of the world.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think by default, this the people that we hang around day to day, the relationships are absolutely everything. Like you and I, we roll with some pretty interesting, some pretty cool people, which means that we're constantly leveling up our performance and as a result, our contributions that we can bring to the world. But if you're surrounding yourself with the same negative, toxic people who are imposing their limiting beliefs upon you. And out of all the things that I know on this planet after 38 years on this journey, almost 38 years, often I forget my age once I'm in my technically late 30s now, it's that the most important opinion is how you feel about yourself. The most important opinion is how you feel about yourself. I had a situation where probably my closest friend in the whole world had mentioned to me several years ago, he's like, look, I will back you with everything that I'm doing. I just cannot for the life of me see how you would make this a success. And that was hard to hear, but I knew deep within that was his reality. That was his lens. And it has been a long, long, long time since I doubted where I was going to end up. And I think as long as we really nurture that self-belief through the people that we hang around, getting out of those environments if we feel like they're toxic or limiting or restrictive in whatever capacity, try and learn as much as we can about a whole bunch of different perspectives and industries and products. That's going to make us so much smarter. And when we have that self belief, it doesn't matter what adversity we face along the way, because we know that we can basically transmute that exact same amount of energy that people use to complain about what they don't have to creating the very circumstances that we want in our life.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so true that those notions. Sorry, I've even just sort of been getting ahead of myself. You've really you've really stimulated my creativity for this sort of stuff. But one thing I want to ask you about now is a chance meeting before we get back into the Think and Grow Rich stuff, because I want to talk about why you're such an authority on talking about some of this. Because I know that you had a chance meeting with some people in Santa Barbara a couple of years ago, and you essentially turned that meeting into an opportunity that would, or in many ways, dictate the next few years of your life, and I'm sure lead to many other opportunities that you're now pursuing.
Yeah, I basically asked them what they were doing with this project, and I said, "Are you going to have a book come out with this? Because every film has a book that comes out with it." And they said, "Yeah," but they were just very vague on the details. Now I gave them a gift. I said, "If I was you, this is what I would do." And they paused. They were like, "Oh my God, that's incredible!" And I had an opportunity to stay in touch. They said, "Look, we just love your energy. We'd love to have you involved in this project. Just tell us how you could be involved in this project." And I said, "Well, tell me again more about what you're thinking on this book side now that you've had a few days to process it." And again, they were just very, very vague. And I said very, very specifically, "This is exactly what you need to do, and it'll be a monster hit." And they said, "Can you do it?" I said, "That's what you should do." And they said, "Can you do it?" And I said, "Yes, I'll knock it out of the park." And that was it. Like being very specific. See, I was willing to give that as a gift. It was totally fine. I would not have bore any resentment at all if they took that and ran with it. It was a gift. It's a bit like when you introduce someone to someone else. They don't always need to be thanking you for making that introduction. You're letting it go. You've made an introduction. It's on them to let that flourish however they want to flourish. They don't need to thank you for that. So by giving that a gift, that is what I guess you could call it a bit like the law of karma in many ways, where these things, they come back to you. The best way to get is to actually give first. And that was just one example of many, many examples of things that I have done through increasingly becoming a person of value and the social capital that I have built up by doing the right thing by a whole bunch of different people.
Yeah, certainly. And I remember what I was thinking of before, and it all comes back to that. And I remember a quote actually in the Think and Grow Rich documentary that I know that you've been involved with as well as an executive producer too. And I think it was by Bob Proctor, and he was talking about Rembrandt and Van Gogh and all these famous artists and famous people. And essentially he said everything that they had available to them, we have too, and we can use too. And I think that's where part of this stuff comes in terms of if we can develop the perspective around what it actually takes to do some of this stuff, to put yourself in a position where when the opportunity arises, you're able to take it, you're able to be specific because you know it fits in with your mission, vision, and values and exactly where you want to go. And exactly like you mentioned in that example, you're able to say specifically, this is what I think we should do with the situation. You can I suppose, impress yourself on a situation from a period of, from a position of having understood some of this stuff rather than just being whimsical, thinking and going, it sounds like a good idea at the time, or yeah.
Yeah, there's something I want to probably mention here too. It's like if we had that meeting, that conversation 10 years earlier, clearly I'm not a good fit for what they're doing. I wouldn't understand it. I wouldn't have a track record to back it up. I wouldn't have the confidence to be able to even have that conversation. I wouldn't be specific on the value that I could give them as a result. So a lot of that is that time of just sucking it up and doing the work to try and make sure that you have some type of specialized knowledge, which is a principle. It's one of the 13 principles of Think and Grow Rich, specialized knowledge, making sure that you have some level of expertise to be able to give those people. So when I was in a situation to do that, I'd had more than 10 years in financial planning, running an advisor team of more than 30 financial advisors for a company with more than $2 billion under management. And I'd written a best-selling book that had been recognized by Money Magazine called The Beginner's Guide to Wealth. And I had a very good network of people who I'd already interviewed. So I was in a position, I did feel a little bit outside my what's the expression, outside your skis or whatever it was. But like, as in, I felt like there was a moment there of being a little bit overawed and a little bit of imposter syndrome. Like, who am I to be writing a modern companion to the best-selling self-help book of all time that's sold more than 120 million copies? So that was it. That was the very first thing. It's like, don't overthink this. And second of all, how can you break that one project up, or that one massive task, that one massive goal, into as many smaller things as possible, and then focus on prioritize, execute. And every single person that I would encounter along the way, I would give them the most amazing experience as I possibly could. I would prepare as well as I possibly could. I would always ask them how I can be of service to them. I would check in with them as best I can. I would never be annoying, and I would really let them know how much I valued their time. And it's something that just has just continued. That theme. It's very, very important, and people notice. They recognize that, especially people who have done a lot of interviews and been around a lot of people. It's easy for them to tell people who have the right energy and the right values from those who don't.
Certainly. And yeah, it's so interesting hearing you describe all that sort of stuff because, I can see it in Think and Grow Rich. I can see it I know Jim Rohn is someone who's been an influence on your life too. And I think you just pull these ideas together so well. But I'm really interested to ask you something, because I think in many ways it gives an insight into people in terms of what their favorite story from Think and Grow Rich, from the original Think and Grow Rich. What's your favorite story that Napoleon Hill wrote about, and why did that resonate with you the most? I reckon I
Yes.
could take a guess. I won't say, but I reckon I could guess what it is.
There's so many different stories, and I think all of them are really, really great. Actually, probably my favorite one from the film is the one of Mary Bethune, who would run miles and miles each day to go to school. Like, that attitude thing is just such a cool one. Almost brings me to tears every time I see it. Another one from the film is about Thomas Edison, where his mum had basically misquoted the note that was given from the teacher at school, which was a game changer. So Thomas Edison would then grow up thinking that he was a genius rather than being addled, as what the teacher said. My favorite story is most likely from the book is most likely 3 Feet from Gold. I think that's just really, really important about the power of persistence. So many people give up. And an example of how that manifests in a modern business sense, it's like, if you want someone to do something for you and you have a very specific ask and you reach out to them and you don't hear back from them in a week, most people would leave it. And 85% or 90% of the results are going to come from the follow-up. So that's where something like the follow-up there, most people give up, but going that little bit of extra mile, it's never crowded. That's when you can initiate some really cool things. Another story from Think and Grow Rich, which is probably just as powerful now that I think about it, is the whole burn the ships idea. I mean, that's just so good. Just going all in on whatever you're doing. And it's been a bit of a gift for things like that with me. I wouldn't necessarily call it a curse at times, but a lot of people over there, particularly people who are very academically gifted, can always overanalyze and overthink and come up with 1 million reasons as to why they shouldn't do something. But I can just come up with one reason as to why I should do something, and I very willingly go all in on that. Now, that leads to a hell of a lot more heartache and stress and frustration and failure, but on the condition that you learn from that and harness that and figure out what you can do to take those experiences to grow and contribute more and more, then all of those things end up being an advantage. So there are a few of the favorites of mine from the book and the film.
Yeah, certainly. I must admit, 3 Feet from Gold is probably my favorite as well. I must admit, I wouldn't necessarily have picked that for you, and I'll tell you why. I'm not now surprised now knowing that, but there's a couple of things that I really like about the 3 Feet from Gold thing. There's the persistence idea in terms of, you're almost there. If you keep going, you can almost get there. But the other thing as well is the fella who bought the junk or the prospecting gear from RU Darby, I believe his name was. Essentially, he found an expert in gold and geology, and essentially found someone who was able to give him the information to find where that gold was and find that it was only 3 feet away. And so there's a real element there of recognizing what your strengths are, what that special knowledge, what that specialized knowledge is that you have, and then recognizing when other people as well have that specialized knowledge too. And I reckon if I was going to guess in terms of yourself, and I think they're almost a little bit like favorite songs in terms of your favorite stories from Think and Grow Rich. You can go through 6 months and you read the book again, and another one stands out to you in a new way. but I would have guessed the Henry Ford one, I think. And
Henry, yeah,
yeah, and the only reason I say that is because one of the things I really wanted to get you to talk on about is this idea of relationships and building relationships and building a circle around you that is going to benefit you in the long run, exactly as you've been talking about. And as I was going back through Think and Grow Rich, which I must admit, it's been a little while, a little bit too long since I'd read the material again. But this fits into this idea of the mastermind. And it seems to me that this is something that you live so authentically in terms of the way that you do things. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to what your ideas are about the mastermind notion from Think and Grow Rich.
sure thing. Well, just to touch back on what you said there about the 3 feet from gold story, there's a quote that I love. It says, opportunities aren't missed, they're just passed on to someone else. So someone else can find the opportunity that you gave up on because you didn't really see it as a worthwhile opportunity, and they can use it to completely transform their life. So I just love that quote. Opportunities are not missed, they're passed on to someone else. The Henry Ford story is great. It's a really, really powerful one because it says that you don't need to have all the answers. You just need to surround yourself with people who can have an aligned mission. Now, that's very, very important. You need to make sure that your mission is a shared mission. Think about the most successful entrepreneurs and CEOs and things on the planet today. I think of people like Elon Musk, who in the most meteoric rise is now the wealthiest person in the world. I know it switches a bit between him and Jeff Bezos. Elon Musk is an absolute expert at being able to find people who believe in his mission, but not only that, they believe in his work ethic. And I actually sat on the plane next to a guy who's become a very close friend of mine who works for SpaceX. And I said to him, we were on a plane to Hawaii, thank God. So I had plenty of time to talk to him about this. He was wearing a SpaceX shirt, a jacket, and a Tesla hat. And I'm like, you got to tell me what's Elon Musk like to work for? And he said he wants people there going as hard as they possibly can. If you want to go and have balance in your life, this is not the place for you. Now, if you want to go there and change the world and literally colonize other planets and solve the energy crisis and completely transform the world, that is the place for you, and you will be around all other people like that. But if you're not willing to put in that work and make those sacrifices, then they will get rid of you pretty quickly, and or you won't get hired in the first place. So Elon Musk, by having it's how he's able to succeed in so many different areas. I mean, he's gone from things like payment processing to energy and electric cars to like a rocket company that is able to do things using reusable rockets for an absolute fraction of the cost of what the government was able to pay for it, because he identified some gaps in the market to do that. So it's an amazing story, the Elon Musk journey. I know he's not the entrepreneur for everyone, but that power of the mastermind is trying to figure out what you can do to make your mission a shared mission, because the sum of all the parts, using like a car as an example, a steering wheel by itself is useless. An engine by itself is useless. But if you can combine all of the elements in a car, they can make a vehicle that goes from 0 to 100 in like 1.9 seconds, as the Tesla can. It is amazing. So you alone can only go so far. Now, people out there who might have a new business idea and they might say to themselves, look, I'm just not going to share it because someone else is going to steal my idea. No one's going to steal your idea. And if they do steal your idea and execute on it better than you did, then it should have been their idea to begin with anyway. It's not your idea. The number of people who get so resentful when they talk to me about an idea that they didn't act on or an idea that someone else used, you've got to really focus on the action side. And the best way to focus on the action side is to surround yourself with people who have an aligned set of values and a diverse background. That's really, really important. You don't want clones of yourself. You want people with a diverse background who have an aligned set of values and an aligned mission and an aligned work ethic and are able to communicate transparently and just keep focusing on the bigger picture and the bigger mission at hand. And when you do that, then you can make anything happen, literally anything happen. I shared an example of how that a couple of examples already here on how that's helped change my life. So to do that, constantly be of service to others. I end every single call or anything that I'm doing with people by saying, let me know how I can help you, or what are you working on at the moment that I can help with, or as always, let me know if there's anything I can do to help you. I would never have a specific ask for someone without including that. And the idea of that, I know this is a bit of a long-winded answer, I'm sorry, but making sure that you've got a specific question, a specific ask. When someone says to you, how can I help? If you have a very specific way that they can help you, then they will help you. Because if they don't know what you want, they can't help you and they won't. And you're leaving a lot of opportunities on the table.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, James, it's such wise words in many ways. And one of the things I love about that, it's actually been quite uncanny timing in terms of when we have this conversation. Because last week's podcast, for those listening out there, last week's podcast looked at a book, amongst other things, called The Creative Curve by Alan Gannett. I'm not sure if you've come across it at all, but basically it was looking at what are the conditions for someone to be creative, because we have this almost myth throughout history that creativity and these genius ideas kind of jump out at you from absolutely nowhere. In terms of, Isaac Newton was apparently hit on the head by an apple and discovered gravity. That actually didn't happen. Paul McCartney basically heard the song yesterday in a dream and then woke up and kind of wrote the melody straight away. But when you look into it and you look into the circumstances that these people were in, such as Paul McCartney, he was playing in the Beatles at that time, and he was jamming with John Lennon and Ringo Starr and George Harrison every day, sort of thing. And he was in a place where he was really able to use the specialized knowledge that he had gained in his own journey. And one thing that I find so interesting with that is that Alan Gannett has essentially 4 laws of creativity. And so the first couple we've spoken a bit about earlier today, in terms of, first one's been consumption. So take everything in whatever subject or field you want to do. The next one is imitation. So essentially copy the people who are doing things well. The third one is a creative community. And as Gannett puts it, there's a couple of roles within that creative community that he sees as being important. And one of those is, for example, the master teacher who can teach you your craft. There's the conflicting collaborator who can almost compensate for your flaws and bring a constructively completely opposite view in that sense. The modern muse, in terms of someone who stimulates your creativity, and the prominent promoter as well, in terms of someone who can lend you a bit of their credibility in exchange for fresh ideas. And I wonder now as well, in terms of those communities that you put together, in terms of the people that you surround yourselves with, how do you decide who are the people who are going to bring, the most value to that? Is it something where you're sitting there and going, I need someone to fulfill this for me. I need, this is an area that I potentially have a weakness in. I need to go find someone for that. Or is it a little bit more circumstantial in terms of the people that I come across? You're more looking, where they can fit into things in terms of more reacting to who they are.
Yeah, really great question. And those 3 things that you mentioned, being consumption, imitation, community, that you mentioned, I think they're really, really important. And one of the most and I totally agree with them. And one of the most underrated abilities is to find people who have the success that you want and find out what they're doing. Like, seriously, just dissect every single part of that process to do what they're doing, to how they got to that level. Whether it's something like a social media video or a podcast, I am constantly looking at what these high performers do who are at the best of their game, that I can imitate in my own way to try and have that result that I want to have. So to answer your question, the best relationships for me have come from an organic friendship, often when business isn't even mentioned. Like, my network now is full of exceptionally high achievers, and it's once we have been able to forge that friendship, if there is any type of business overlap, there is an opportunity then for us to do some cool things together. Now, I let them know, first of all, before they ever get any ask from me, that I will do literally anything that they want at any time. And I feel like I do that pretty well with anyone who's in my network. But at the same time, if I have something that I really need and I reach out to that person, I do have fairly high standards for the people that I surround myself with. And it's a bit like if you're out at a bar and you buy the first sort of couple of rounds of drinks, which is totally fine. Like, I'm not big on keeping score, but if you know someone out there is never wanting to put their hand up, and someone is just using and using and using. And I think we all have this intuition deep down, which has been one of my biggest lessons of about the last 5 years, is to trust your instinct when it comes to people. I feel like I can tell in 3 seconds whether or not you're sort of my type of person. If you are my type of person, I'll give you everything that I got until you give me a reason not to. And if you're not my kind of person, we'll just have a bit of a surface level conversation, or we won't have any conversation, because I just don't see the benefit there for either of us. And we're not all, I don't mean that to be a dick. I mean, we're not all supposed to be aligned with absolutely every single person on the planet. But if you can find a core group of 5 people or 10 people that can then become 20 people and 40 people who you will do everything for, and knowing that when you need something that they will do that for you, I think that's really, really important. So for me, it starts off with a friendship, and often a lot of the great relationships that I have had are as a result of someone who I already trust implicitly, bringing in someone else who's one of their best friends. So you can start at a high level very, very quickly. And having that diversity, like the little mastermind groups that I've formed in the last, I guess, going right back, like I'm talking about just getting a group of people with aligned values, like we spoke about, the power of the mastermind, where we bring different contributions based on our unique experience in life, in business, in relationships. And we think about ways that we can support each other and help all of us grow together. They're the things that I'm focused on. And inevitably, when there's a business type of overlap, like I'm running a mastermind at the moment called the Day One Mastermind. I've got some very, very high level people where I'll just send them an audio message, or we'll be having a coffee or a beer or something. And I'll say, look, hey, I need you to come and speak to this group. And they're like, cool, done. Because they know that I would turn around and do that for them. It's not like it's a 45-minute email or anything else. Like it's done, because they know that I would only ask if it was something that I really wanted, or it was an opportunity to help with their mission, or it's just something that they could do to contribute. So they're the things that I focus on. Now, for people for my podcast, specifically as a guest, I'm always thinking about whoever is coming on my podcast. I want to play the long game. I almost imagine that there's already a friendship that takes place once the podcast is done. So I'm creating that memory, even though it hasn't happened yet. I'm creating that for the future. So I like to think, what's then missing from my life, or what's missing from my audience's life? Like I had a guy on recently who was the world's #1 sleep doctor. I've not had anyone on my podcast talk about sleep before, so that was a really cool connection to make. So thinking about what's missing, well, I haven't had someone who's like an absolute gun on nutrition. That's an opportunity for me to reach out to someone who I know, or to someone to talk about, a whole bunch of different things. So finding out a whole bunch of diverse areas. But importantly here, I connect all of those people together. So the sleep doctor, I was able to connect with someone else who was probably the most high profile person I'm connected with. So once you can start to connect a whole lot of other people together, they remember that for you. They don't need to give me any credit. I would never want any credit for that. It's their friendship to grow. But they know that I have tried to do something to add value to their lives, to give them a new relationship and a new connection. So it means if I say to them, look, I know you're connected with this Navy SEAL person who you had on your podcast, or who you're tight with, I would love an introduction to that person if you feel like it's a great fit and you're happy to do that. And of course, they're going to say yes, because of the social capital, because of the relationship, because of what I've given them first.
Yeah, I really like the emphasis on positivity that comes with that, in terms of you're coming from your place of wanting to help people. I know you've only got a couple of minutes, so we'll finish it up here. But just to finish up, there's anything that sums you up to me, James, it is your ability to have authentic relationships with people, to be authentically yourself, and to put that out there for other people to interact with. And I know that since knowing you, since having you as one of my mentors, I've gotten so much out of even just being exposed to someone like yourself and the attitudes that you have, and someone who really genuinely wants to create this positive force around who they are, what they do, and the people that they interact with. It's something that I find so empowering, even just to get a sense of how someone like yourself does it so successfully. But it's just encouraging as well to recognize that, there's so much, excuse my French, bullshit, but there's so much bullshit that goes on. And when you see someone like yourself who has these attitudes, who's developed these attitudes in a way that has such strength to them, I think it just, gives me such hope for the future. And it's so motivating to want to get involved in something like that. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. And I wish when I was your age that I was as motivated and advanced as you are. So you're doing amazing things for where you're at. And I love supporting you, because you're doing such an amazing job of just bringing such a bright energy and helping so many people in the world, which is great. And anyone who wants like a very specific way of being able to help brighten other people's lives, something that's been working really well for me lately is just things like audio messages. So you can send text messages or on Messenger, all of those things that accommodate those audio messages. And it's just an easy way. If you allocated 2 or 3 minutes each day to sending between 5 and 10 meaningful audio messages, checking in with people, offering to be of help, just letting you know that I was thinking of you. As always, if there's anything I can do to help, let me know. If you did that times 365 days in the year, you would have an enormous bunch of super amazing people who will help you with anything that you want in life.
Oh, thanks so much for everything you've said today, James, but also for everything that you've done for me, because I cannot understate the positive influence that you've been on me and Ronsley and everyone else with We Are Members, the group that we're in together. I'm looking at my list here. I've literally skipped through half of it. I could talk to you forever. So thank you so much.
My pleasure, Ron. We'll have to schedule a second interview at some stage in the future.
Certainly looking forward to it. Thank you.